We all do things we know that aren't good for us. Today we're joined by Dr. Terry Burnham, a professor of economics at Chapman University. He'll explain his theories about why we do the things we do. Terry, thanks for coming today.
Hey Larry, great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
So you wrote this fascinating book, Mean Genes. And can you tell us the background of this and what's going on with mean genes?
Yes. So all of us, as you said, do things that we would like to do differently. And when most people think about why they do these, say they fight with their family too much, or they eat the wrong foods or too much food, and they ask, why do I do this? They frequently will think about TV or culture or magazines. And in this book, my co-author and I, Jay Phelan, we talk about the genetic basis for these issues. And we think the genetic view can help us understand these issues.
So meaning that we are pre-programmed, each person to do a thing a certain way, and that's not modifiable?
Well, there's two pieces to that. The first piece is we're here because our ancestors survived and reproduced. And thinking about the world that they lived in, we can help understand what shaped our brains and our bodies. The second piece that you brought about was, is it pre-programmed or hardwired or inflexible? And we're optimists, and I'm an optimist on this. This is a self-improvement book. This is the first Darwinian self-improvement book. It's a self-improvement book with the thought that if you're smart and crafty, you can change your behavior and have better outcomes.
Okay, so let's talk about food, because that's a big one that we all kind of don't go and do the right thing for. So, for instance, like fats, why do a lot of people crave fats, and why are they bad for us?
Yes, well, food is everyone's favorite subject. I just had my DNA tested by this company 23andMe. I got the report yesterday. So there's a 66% chance that I will be obese. And the average person in the US, 65% chance.
Oh, so you're average.
So I'm exactly average. We all have this problem. So 2/3 of people in the US have the problem that we eat too much food. And the question is why? And again, I think if you went to most people, even people like the Surgeon General, they think it's portion size or TV. And the perspective, the evolutionary perspective says no. Think about your ancestors. So up until very recently, the problem that humans faced was not enough food. So our bodies and our brains are built to look around for extra calories and eat them whenever possible. And we have this amazing ability to store the extra food that we have. If we get lucky one day and we get a lot of food, what do? We store it as body fat. So the evolutionary perspective says we modern humans have problems with obesity because our ancestors had problems with being hungry. And that's the perspective across the whole book for all the problems that we deal with today.
Okay, so what worked as a survival mechanism 2 million years ago, now it's something that will help us not survive as long.
Correct.
Right? Yeah.
So both the health issues are associated with, and also just whether we feel good about it or not. So both those problems are rooted in an ancestral past where people were hungry.
So can you explain different food types, like say eating well, trans fats are a man-made thing, but say trans fats. Why do we eat trans fats?
Yes, so we like fats for two reasons. First, fat has a lot of calories. Fats have more calories per gram than carbohydrates or proteins. And again, get back into your hunter-gatherer brain when you were starving all the time. So your brain and your mouth have mechanisms built in to look for fats and to like foods that have more fat. Again, so the same answer, your mouth sends a little dopamine shot, goes from the mouth to the brain when you get fat, and that's because fats were good. One, a lot of calories. Two, there are certain essential fatty acids that you can't get synthesized, so you have to get them from the environment. So we like fat because it was good for our ancestors.
Now, after we stopped hunting and we started raising food, how does meat come into this? Meat was one time good for us, right? I mean, that's all they can find to survive, is that right? And now meat is not good for us, or how does that fit into the pattern?
The diet had a huge shift around 10,000 years ago when humans started doing agriculture, and agriculture included lots of carbohydrates. So humans, for as long as we've been around, have liked and hunted and ate meat. And about 10,000 years ago, we had this big change where we started eating carbohydrates. Again, the problem with eating modern meats today, the potential problem is eating too much and eating too much fat. So again, if you thought about game that you might catch naturally, probably be much leaner than the fats that are delivered to us. So again, we're designed to want to eat a lot of food, we want to eat fat, and in the modern world it's very easy to get too much of food in general and too much of fats in particular.
So what about other behaviors, like, can you explain smoking? Why, I mean, how does that fit into this kind of pattern? Can you explain that?
Sure. So again, your brain has been evolved for ancestral problems, and most drugs or products that we have, recreational drugs or illegal drugs, fit into the brain circuitry. So for example, you brought up nicotine. Nicotine will stimulate certain parts of the brain, and that just makes us feel good. It's hitchhiking, we say, on an evolutionary pathway. There's nothing ancestral about nicotine per se, but it hitchhikes on that pathway. Some other things that are interesting are things like illegal drugs. So we're built to repeat behaviors that lead to the release of dopamine. So when you are successful in school or you eat food or other activities, you feel good. And some of these drugs can really fire almost all the dopamine receptors at one time. So if you take really purified crack cocaine, for example, something like 70% of your dopamine receptors fire at one time. So it's just incredible positive response, and your brain is built to reproduce that. So again, same problem as food, which is you have a brain which is built to release dopamine when you do good things. And in the modern environment, instead of having good things release that, like loving your child, it can be doing an illegal drug.
I see.
And that's the struggle that we live in. We live in a world that's so different from the world in which our ancestors lived in.
So what about exercise then? Why do some people want to exercise and feel good about it and some don't like to exercise? The receptors are different, or do you have any idea about that?
Sure. Humans are built to be efficient. So we'll work hard when we need to work hard, but the notion of wasting energy is something that would be inappropriate. So I was living in Uganda one summer, and I was wasting energy. I was riding around on my motorcycle, and I saw someone out jogging. And no one in Uganda jogs, in rural Uganda. And I thought, oh, okay. I went up. It was someone from Switzerland. So, so the ancestral problem, again, is, sure, you'll spend calories. If you need to walk 5 miles to go and gather food or to go hunt an animal, you'll do it. But you won't frivolously waste calories, because the people who waste calories die.
That's fascinating.
So we're built to always have to overcome that. And one of the things that my co-author and I have done over the years is collect letters from people who've had success stories. And just that notion that it's never going to be easy for you to go to the gym, you're never going to want to go, seems to have helped a lot of people. So people will do things like they'll make an appointment with someone and then they'll turn their phone off so they have to go meet them. Or they'll pack their gym bag the night before and leave it in the car, just because that activation energy to go to the gym is so hard. And the underlying realization that, hey, my ancestors were lazy because being lazy was the right thing in that environment, seems to help people.
Well, that's fascinating, because I was thinking just the opposite, like being fit would be a survival benefit, but in that world, they were fit because they had to do all this manual type stuff.
Yes, and they only worked for goals that were appropriate. And the same thing if you look at animals. So you look at a lion, they sleep anytime they can sleep, right? They're sleeping. But when it's time to go run fast, they go run fast when they have to.
That's fascinating. Well, how do hormones, I mean, you mentioned you did some research on testosterone, right? And so how do hormones or natural hormones, or mainly testosterone, or if you want estrogen, how do they fit into this pattern?
Yes. So testosterone is part of the machinery that you're built with to help you navigate the world. And again, you have to think about that ancestral world. And so testosterone is very involved with social dominance. Most people think, you know, big muscles and that, and it certainly can be. One interesting study is after Mean Genes came out, we got invited to go on the Howard Stern show, and we got his testosterone levels. And so if you thought that testosterone was associated with young, muscular men, you would have predicted that some of the young men on Howard's staff would have high T. But if you think of it as being the alpha male, you'd have predicted that would be Howard. And so it turned out that Howard had the highest testosterone by far, even though he was much older than the other people. So the idea is that testosterone is helping you figure out how to navigate the world and take the correct behaviors for yourself.
So testosterone, is that something that he developed and that made him the alpha male, or was he genetically pre-programmed with high testosterone?
Yes. So in humans, we don't know so well. Most of the studies are correlational. So high status people tend to be high testosterone people more than average. True across species, gorillas, chimpanzees, et cetera, as well. What is true is when you get into conflict and you do something like wrestling, the person who wins the wrestling match has higher T than the loser. What's also interesting is that it doesn't have to be physical confrontation. It can be chess match, and even it could be the fans. So there's one great study of World Cup finals. They took fans watching the game, and they took their testosterone levels before and after the game.
That's right.
And all the people who were rooting for the team that lost had testosterone drops, and all the people who were rooting for the team that won had testosterone rises.
Well, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's pre-programmed, but it can also be modified based on your success or not success.
Yes, but as far as we know, it's a characteristic that has some stickiness. So if you're a high T person when you're young, you're a high T person when you're old. And there's a study that looks at little hands of little baby boys, And testosterone works similarly in men and women, but more is known about in men, and correlates their hand shape. These are little x-rays taken when they were little kids to where they are when they're older.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
And what they find is that when you look at the person's hand, if you have a relatively long fourth digit to a second digit, that means when you were inside your mother, you had relatively high testosterone. The way I think about it is the finger that has to be long for testosterone is the one that people who are married wear a ring on in the United States. So, you know, being a real macho guy is taking care of your family, having the ring on that finger. So if you look, it's really funny. People have tremendous variation. I looked at yours. You have a masculine or slightly above masculine
That's
hand.
a big ring finger. Come on.
Huge. You're massive. But some people, it's really interesting. I mean, there's tremendous variation. And you can look at people like football players, they often will have a masculine
That's
pattern.
fascinating.
And the other thing that's funny is that everybody wants to have the masculine pattern. When I ask the question, nobody wants to have the other pattern, even though testosterone is associated with cancer and with dying young. So if you have a lot of testosterone, you're more likely to die young. In fact, in one study where they looked at men who'd been castrated for other reasons, they weren't castrated for the study, they died 13 years younger than their paired sample. So huge negative effect on lifespan from having high T, yet everyone wants to be a high T person. Because high T is associated with social dominance, being outgoing, being friendly, and sort of winning in many aspects of life. And so we're all willing to do that to die a little earlier.
That's fascinating. Well, we're just about out of time. So what is the take-home message with Mean Genes? Is that we could change our life by understanding our past, or?
Exactly. And you have to be crafty, because the opponent is not a TV ad. It's much worse than that. It's inside your own genes, and they're very powerful. And so you have to be really smart. And in each chapter, we do be so bold as to try to create advice for how to outsmart your own genes.
Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Larry. Appreciate it.